A 16-year-old murder suspect was just quietly stripped of his freedom and handed over to U.S. Marshals. But it isn't because he ran away or cut off his GPS ankle monitor. In a dramatic update to the Anna Kepner case, federal prosecutors dropped an emergency motion that completely upended Timothy Hudson's house arrest. The catalyst? Unsealed digital forensics hidden inside an Apple Watch that perfectly synchronized with ship cabin logs to shatter early alibis. Now, a federal judge has invoked a strict statutory weapon to revoke his bond completely. The system didn't just change its mind, it completely shifted the legal presumption of innocence. Let's break down the unyielding data. If you want the real facts on complex legal battles, make sure to hit subscribe. Welcome back to U.S. Crime Cases. Let's get into it. To really understand exactly how we got here, we have to look closely at the baseline mechanics of the original pretrial release. When this case first entered the federal system, the immediate question was where Timothy Hudson would stay while awaiting his trial. According to unsealed federal court dockets, the 16-year-old was initially permitted to remain out of a detention facility. Instead, the court ruled he could be placed under house arrest at his uncle's residence. Now, house arrest at the federal level is not just a polite request to stay indoors. He was fitted with an active GPS ankle monitor as part of incredibly strict confinement parameters. This means law enforcement knew his exact coordinates 24 hours a day. The defense team leaned heavily on this fact. In their statutory brief, Hudson's attorneys argued that he maintained absolute, flawless compliance with this electronic system. According to the defense, he did not violate his curfew once. He did not damage or tamper with his electronic monitor, and he made zero attempts to flee the jurisdiction. You hear that, and you might think, right, he is doing exactly what the court asked him to do. From the defense's perspective, this perfect track record proved that the house arrest setup was working exactly as designed. They argued to the judge that because he was being monitored so closely, he posed no flight risk and no immediate danger to the community. But then the prosecution stepped in and completely changed the angle of the conversation. The prosecution contended in their emergency motion that compliance with tracking hardware was no longer the primary issue. Following the unsealing of new investigative findings, which we will get to, federal prosecutors aggressively intervened. They argued to the court that under adult federal law, the specific environment of the uncle's home presented an unmanageable statutory risk. Why was the home suddenly an issue? Court records show that the prosecution pointed out a crucial detail. Other minors actively resided in that immediate household. The government argued that continuing home confinement for an individual who is actively facing adult life felony charges created an active safety liability. They told the judge that the state could no longer legally validate putting other children in close proximity to the defendant, regardless of how well the ankle monitor was working. Wow, when you really stop and look at that argument, it shifts the entire focus from the technology on his ankle to the physical reality of the house he was sleeping in. An ankle monitor can tell the police if someone leaves the front door, but as the prosecution argued, it cannot monitor what happens inside the living room. This is a good moment to pause and remember why we are even discussing these legal mechanics. At the very center of this massive federal process is 18-year-old Anna Kepner. Her life was cut short, and her family is currently living through an unimaginable reality. When we talk about these court motions and these legal debates, we are ultimately talking about a family's search for the truth. According to public statements made by their legal counsel, Anna's father, Christopher Kepner, said that the family is placing their trust in the justice system to pursue the facts with care and integrity. They want the truth of what happened on that cruise ship to come to light. We have to keep her memory and the immense gravity of her loss at the forefront of our minds as we navigate the heavy legal language of this case. The debate over the uncle's house and the GPS monitor was ultimately placed on the desk of U.S. Magistrate Judge Edwin Torres. And Judge Torres didn't just give a simple ruling from the bench. He issued a comprehensive 14-page order that completely broke down the legal architecture of this decision. Applying the strict parameters of the Federal Bail Reform Act, Judge Torres noted that the rules of the game change entirely based on the severity of the charges. You see, normally, our system operates on the presumption of innocence. The default setting is that you should be allowed to go home and prepare for your trial. But Judge Torres explained that when a federal grand jury formally indicts a minor as an adult for a severe offense, specifically one carrying a maximum penalty of life imprisonment, the legal landscape automatically shifts. Under these very specific severe conditions, the statutory presumption moves heavily against release. The law actually flips. Instead of presuming you should be free, the Bail Reform Act dictates that the court must lean entirely toward mandatory pretrial detention. The burden shifts to the defense to prove why they shouldn't be locked up. The defense fought this, of course. They argued that because Hudson was a juvenile and because he had followed all the house arrest rules perfectly for months, the court should overlook that harsh statutory presumption. They wanted the judge to look at the teenager's recent behavior, not just the massive weight of the adult indictment. But Judge Torres looked closely at the facts presented by the U.S. Attorney's Office. He wrote that the prosecution's situational evidence met a very high legal threshold. In federal court, to revoke someone's release like this, the evidence must be clear and convincing. The judge ruled that the government met this mark. He stated that the safety risk to the public, and specifically the safety risk to the other minors living in that household, completely outweighed any electronic tracking structure the defense could offer. The system didn't just change its mind about Timothy Hudson. The legal parameters of his reality shifted underneath him. The moment that 14-page order was signed, his bond was officially revoked. There was no negotiation for a stricter curfew. There was no option to move to a different relative's house that didn't have children. The statutory weapon of the Bail Reform Act was deployed, and his freedom before trial was completely stripped away. We left off talking about the environment of the house arrest, but the real bombshell, the absolute core of the prosecution's emergency motion, came down to something you probably have on your wrist right now. Let's rewind for a second and take a much closer look at the actual forensic matrix that caused this massive shift in the case. When we look at federal cases like the Anna Kepner tragedy, it is so incredibly easy to get completely lost in the rigid legal paperwork. You read through the unsealed court dockets, and it is all formal language, motions, jurisdictions, and statutory guidelines. But we have to stop and remember who this is really about. This is about Anna Kepner. She was just 18 years old. She was supposed to be on a family vacation aboard the Carnival Horizon cruise ship. A cruise is supposed to be this completely safe, fun escape, right? You go there to relax and make memories. Instead, it turned into an absolute nightmare for her family. According to public statements from the family's legal counsel, her father, Christopher Kepner, has made it clear that they are putting their full trust in the justice system to find the truth with care and integrity. We have to keep Anna's memory and the unimaginable grief her family is navigating right at the center of this conversation. We are looking closely at these mechanics because finding the truth is the only thing that brings any kind of justice to a situation like this. Because this happened on a cruise ship in international waters, local police didn't have jurisdiction. The court records show that the FBI had to step in and assume control of the investigation. And when the federal government takes over, they bring a level of technical scrutiny that is staggering. So what actually caused the prosecutors to drop that emergency motion and revoke Timothy Hudson's house arrest? The primary driver validating all of this rests on some incredibly sophisticated digital evidence compiled by the FBI. I want you to think about how crimes used to be solved. Usually it was a case of a witness changing their story on the stand, or someone hearing something through a wall and coming forward. But human memory is deeply flawed. People get confused, they misremember times, or their perspective gets skewed by trauma. The prosecution didn't bring human memory to Judge Edwin Torres. They brought hard, unchangeable data. As documented in the unsealed FBI digital forensic log, specialized digital analysts stepped in and successfully extracted stored data directly from Anna's Apple Watch. It is wild when you really think about it. Most of us are wearing smartwatches right now. We use them to check texts or track our steps, but they are constantly pulling data. They know when we are sleeping, they monitor our heart rates, and they track every tiny physical movement. In a federal investigation, these everyday devices essentially become digital witnesses. The forensic analysis that the government presented to the court pinpointed a highly specific 3-hour time window. During this exact window, the smart device abruptly stopped transmitting heart rate metrics and physical movement data. It didn't fade out or slowly power down. The prosecution stated that the biological telemetry just stopped. Wow, just a sudden, complete gap in the data in the middle of the night. If you haven't subscribed, please hit that button right now to stay updated on real, factual, legal case breakdowns just like this one every week. Now, if you're looking at this from the outside, you might think, well, batteries die. People take their watches off before bed and set them on the nightstand. I see that. That is a completely logical thought process. A gap in Apple Watch data, just on its own, doesn't automatically prove a crime occurred at that precise second. The federal investigators knew that too. They knew they needed to build a much tighter, undeniable timeline if they were going to ask a judge to revoke a 16-year-old's pretrial release and send him to a secure facility. So, to tighten that timeline, federal prosecutors took this biological telemetry gap and perfectly cross-referenced it with the ship's internal electronic keycard access logs. They went straight to the Carnival Horizon's door data. If you have ever been on a modern cruise ship, you know exactly how those doors work. They don't use metal keys. Every single time you open your stateroom door, a computer system logs the RFID chip inside your keycard. It logs the exact second the lock disengages. The vessel logs pulled from the exact cabin that Anna shared with Timothy Hudson conclusively proved that absolutely no one entered or exited that room during that exact 3-hour period. The door remained entirely locked from the outside. No cabin stewards came in to clean, no ship security walked through, and no other family members entered. The digital logs showed 0 entries and 0 exits. The prosecution utilized this synchronized data to directly challenge the defense's early public timeline assertions. Before these forensic logs were unsealed, there were different alibis floating around about when things happened and who was where. But by taking the dead stop on the Apple Watch and perfectly layering it over the silent door logs, the government established a rigid, inescapable timeline of events. And they didn't stop there. They had to connect this digital timeline to the physical reality of the crime. According to the medical examiner's autopsy findings, the official cause of Anna's death was mechanical asphyxiation. The prosecution stated in court that by matching these mechanical trauma logs with the sole occupancy data from the keycard reader, they had their window locked in. They argued to the judge that the trauma inflicted upon Anna had to have occurred during that precise 3-hour window, the exact time when the door never opened and the exact time when the watch went dark. It is heavy, and it is a chilling realization when you see how investigators put 2 completely different pieces of technology together to tell the story of what happened in a room where no one else was present. But remember, we are looking at this from both sides, exactly as it happened in the courtroom. To maintain that dual theory balance, it is critically important to note the defense's structural counter-argument. Timothy Hudson is 16 years old, and he has pleaded not guilty to these charges. His defense team, led by attorneys from the Federal Public Defender's Office, maintains the strict legal presumption of innocence. In court, the defense pushed back hard against this entire digital matrix. They heavily questioned the absolute reliability of digital smart device metrics being used as a substitute for direct physical evidence. They debated this passionately with the judge. From the defense's perspective, consumer-grade technology glitches all the time. Software updates fail, sensors lose contact with the skin, and devices freeze. They argued that an Apple Watch is not a flawless medical device, and a gap in its telemetry should not legally carry enough weight to completely dismantle an early alibi. Right, it is a compelling legal argument when you realize what is actually at stake here. The defense team looked at the situation and pointed out that Hudson had been complying perfectly with his house arrest. Being on federal house arrest is not easy. He was wearing an active GPS monitor on his ankle, and, according to his lawyers, he hadn't broken a single rule. He stayed exactly where he was supposed to be. They debated whether it is fair or legal to trigger the revocation of pretrial freedom for a defendant based on a synchronized data gap from a watch and a door log. They essentially asked the court, should a digital anomaly override the fact that this young man has followed every physical rule of his release? From their side, if the system is designed to monitor if someone is a flight risk, his perfect compliance should be the only thing that matters. This is the exact gridlock that was laid out before Judge Torres. You have the government saying, look at the data. The timeline is undeniable. The watch and the door tell the exact same story. And you have the defense saying, he is presumed innocent, technology is flawed, and you shouldn't lock a teenager in a federal facility before his trial just because a watch stopped recording. It is a massive debate over how much power we give to the digital footprints we leave behind, and it completely altered the trajectory of this case. So the court ultimately decided that the unyielding data from that cabin was simply too significant to ignore, right? Once Judge Edwin Torres looked at the synchronized Apple Watch data and the keycard logs, he made his decision and everything changed overnight. The moment Judge Torres signed that 14-page detention order, Timothy Hudson's bond was formally and completely voided. Just like that, the house arrest was over. The ankle monitor didn't matter anymore. He was immediately remanded into the custody of the U.S. Marshals Service. According to the court records, Hudson actually surrendered to the U.S. Marshals in Tampa. Now, if you really sit down and think about it, that is a massive, sudden shift in reality. 1 minute, you are sitting in your uncle's house, sleeping in a normal bed, eating normal food, and just making sure you don't step outside your curfew zone. The next minute, federal agents are taking you into secure custody. Wow. But because Hudson is only 16 years old yet actively facing a very severe adult federal indictment, the correction system suddenly had a massive logistical problem on its hands. They are required by law to navigate a very specific, very complicated dual protocol. You see, you cannot just drop a 16-year-old into a standard federal prison block. Federal statutory provisions strictly prohibit housing juveniles within general adult municipal jail populations. The law is absolute on this. The court said you cannot mix a minor with adult inmates, period, no matter how serious the charges are. Consequently, Hudson was transferred to a specialized secure juvenile detention facility that contracts directly with the federal government. But here's the catch, and this is where the legal system gets really rigid. While he is housed in this juvenile wing to keep him physically safe from adult inmates, the court has mandated that he does not receive any juvenile leniency. I see people get confused by this all the time. They hear juvenile facility and think of rehabilitation centers or lenient schedules. But that is not what is happening here. He is held under strict adult programmatic restrictions. He is completely isolated. He is treated with the full severity of an adult defendant who is facing life in prison, just housed in a different building. He will remain under these exact unbending parameters every single day while awaiting his formal trial date, which the court has firmly scheduled for September 1st, 2026. That is the reality of his situation now. But as we talk about these facilities and these legal protocols, we have to pause. We have to bring this back to why this is happening. At the heart of all this legal maneuvering is Anna Kepner. She was just 18 years old. She had her entire life ahead of her. We are dissecting court dockets and digital evidence, but her family is living a daily nightmare. They lost a daughter, a sister, a loved one in a profoundly traumatic way. When we discuss the mechanics of the justice system, we have to speak with genuine empathy for the victims. The Kepner family has publicly stated through their legal counsel that they are putting their trust in the justice system to find the truth. They are waiting for that September 2026 trial date with a wait that none of us can truly comprehend. The legal process is incredibly slow, and for a family seeking answers, every single day must feel like an eternity. We have to keep Anna's memory at the center of this conversation. We are looking for facts because the truth is the only thing that can bring any real closure to this tragedy. This technical modification of the bond conditions, taking a teenager from house arrest and putting him in a secure federal lockdown based on new evidence, has sparked an intense, completely objective debate among legal commentators. Everyone in the legal community is talking about how the Bail Reform Act should actually balance a defendant's age, their strict compliance, and newly unsealed forensic evidence. On one side of the room, you have the legal purists. They argue that Judge Torres' order was a necessary, correct, and unavoidable application of the law. From their point of view, an ankle monitor is completely irrelevant if the unsealed facts show that the home environment itself introduces risks. Remember, the prosecution stated that there were other minors living in that uncle's house. The purists argue that the safety of those other children has to come first. If you are charged as an adult with a life felony, they believe the federal government cannot legally justify letting you sleep in a house down the hall from other kids, right? It makes sense when you look at it from a strict liability standpoint. But then you look at the other side of the aisle. Defense advocates deeply question the necessity of revoking a bond when a defendant has shown absolutely zero tracking violations. They debate whether this sets an overly strict standard. After all, under the Constitution, he is legally presumed innocent right now. He has pleaded not guilty. His lawyers argue that if he followed every single rule the court gave him for months, ripping away his house arrest feels like a punishment before a conviction. They ask if it is truly fair to upend his life based on a data gap from a smartwatch and a keycard log, rather than a physical violation of his bail. It really makes you think about how fragile pretrial freedom can be. Based on the strict mechanics of this case and looking at the facts presented by both the prosecution and the defense, there are three fact-based debates I want us to consider and discuss today. Question 1 comes down to compliance versus the environment. The defense strongly highlighted that the 16-year-old defendant maintained complete, flawless compliance with his GPS tracking monitor while on house arrest. However, the federal judge ruled that the presence of other minors in the home created an unacceptable safety risk under adult federal law. So I want to know your thoughts. Should a defendant's flawless compliance with tracking rules prevent a judge from revoking bail? Or must the environmental safety of others, like the other children in that house, always override previous good behavior? Question 2 is all about the technology. Federal investigators synchronized a 3-hour transmission gap on Anna's Apple Watch with shipboard electronic door logs showing no entries or exits. The prosecution said this directly challenged the defense's early timeline of events. From a strict legal standpoint, do you believe digital smart device metrics are reliable enough to serve as the primary catalyst for revoking a suspect's freedom before a trial? Or should physical evidence carry more weight when someone's freedom is on the line? It is a fascinating look at where law and technology intersect. And finally, question 3 focuses on the weight of the law itself. Under Judge Edwin Torres' 14-page application of the Bail Reform Act, the moment a minor is indicted as an adult for a charge carrying a maximum penalty of life imprisonment, the legal presumption shifts. It shifts heavily against release and toward mandatory detention. In your opinion, does shifting the presumption toward detention for an unconvicted minor actually protect community safety, or does it fundamentally challenge the core principle of being presumed innocent until proven guilty? These are not easy questions, and there are no simple answers. The system is designed to balance community safety with individual rights. But in cases this severe, that balance is incredibly difficult to find. Thank you for staying till the end. If you want more factual, unbiased updates on cases like this, please subscribe to U.S. Crime Cases Today.